Wow, thank you, Jennifer and Hudson, for your inspiring words. They're an important reminder that we are part of a larger body of Unitarian Universalists and that we are part of a living tradition with a legacy and a history that precedes us and will continue after we're gone. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before, and it's humbling to realize that others will stand on ours someday. It is good for each of us to think about what our legacy will be. We live in unprecedented times. You may have heard that before. We live in unprecedented times when the winds of change are relentless. And I can honestly say that I don't know how I would weather these times without my Unitarian Universalist faith or without the communities of faith like this one that make Unitarian Universalism what it is today. An article in the spring 2022 issue of the UU World magazine describes our inclusive and pluralistic faith this way. It says, it's right there in our name, Unitarian Universalism. But the layers go deeper than the consolidation of two American religious traditions. Theological Unitarianism from the Radical Reformation in Eastern Europe meets 18th century King's Chapel in Boston. From John Murray at the Universalist Chapel in Boston to Swami Vivekananda of the World's Parliament of Religions. Christians, humanists, atheists, Jews, pagans, Buddhists, and Muslims, spiritual refugees, and lifelong UUs with multi-generational family histories. University scholars, ordained ministers, chaplains, and lay leaders, religious educators and administrators, and music ministers. Unitarian Universalism is not, as some may quip, a place where we can believe anything we want. It is a place to approach our growth as spiritual people with openness and curiosity, a place where multiple beliefs, multiple traditions, and multiple life experiences will enrich and inform our experience. In community, we piece together a faith that seeks to make sense of the world and empowers us to create change. As a lifelong student of Unitarian and Universalist histories, I find hope in the stories of people who came before, people who, when it comes right down to it, are a lot like me and a lot like you, with all their faults and failures, with their goodness and their success, navigating their own tumultuous times, trying to make their way through life with meaning and purpose. So over the next 2 Sundays, we'll be looking at some of the streams of faith that endure to this day, connecting us to our Unitarian and Universalist past, beginning with Unitarianism today and continuing with Universalism next week. These are streams of faith that can hold us and sustain us in our own time as constant currents in a sea of change. American Unitarianism didn't spring from one source. Rather, it came together like rivers and streams meeting and merging. We might say it was pluralistic at the very beginning. We hear echoes of Francis David, the 16th century Transylvanian Unitarian, who is quoted as saying, "We need not think alike to love alike." Through the stories of our religious ancestors, we see something of who we are today. Here on U.S. soil, James Freeman was the first preacher in America to call himself a Unitarian. Born in Charlestown, Massachusetts in 1759, Freeman grew into adulthood and went on to serve for 43 years as minister of King's Chapel in Boston, which was founded as an Episcopal church in 1686, which made it the first Episcopal church in New England. So in a way, we spring from Episcopalians. Freeman was first invited to be what was called a reader at King's Chapel. The invitation was for 6 months, and at the end of that time, he was asked to become pastor of the church. He accepted on the condition that he not have to recite the Athanasian Creed, as was their custom, and the congregation readily agreed to that. And soon after, he began to have doubts. Particularly, he had doubts about the doctrine of the Trinity and was increasingly uncomfortable with the liturgy in the Episcopal Book of Common Prayer. When he wondered if he should relinquish his position, a friend convinced him to take the issue to the congregation and let them decide. Freeman then preached a series of sermons. He was convinced that they would be the last he ever preached there because in them he stated his reasons for rejecting the Trinity and his dissatisfaction with the liturgy. To his surprise, his sermons and ideas were well received, and over time, Freeman convinced the congregation to make changes to the liturgy by removing all references to the Trinity. And if you visit King's Chapel today, you can see the Book of Common Prayer rewritten as a Unitarian Anglican Book of Common Prayer. The congregation, wishing to remain connected to the Episcopal Church, sent a request to the bishop to confer ordination upon James Freeman. When the request was denied, the wardens of the church took it upon themselves to ordain. In 1787, Freeman was made rector, minister, priest, pastor, and ruling elder of Stone Chapel. My guess he was one busy man. With the acceptance of a Unitarian liturgy and the ordaining of a Unitarian as minister, it might be said that King's Chapel is the oldest Unitarian church in the country. It remains today as a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Now, some say that Joseph Priestley was the first Unitarian minister in the United States. Priestley fled England after his home, his laboratory, and the Unitarian chapel where he served as minister were burned in the Birmingham riots in 1791. All of his belongings were destroyed, including his papers. He is known as the founder of the British Unitarian Church and as the father of modern chemistry. He is credited with the discovery of oxygen and as the inventor of soda water. So you can tell your children as they're enjoying their soda that it's thanks to Joseph Priestley. He helped to found the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia in 1796, which also remains today as a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association. There's a story that I love about Joseph Priestley. And one of my favorite stories, here it is. It's about a childhood memory that influenced his later scientific discoveries. As a child, he noticed that if you keep a bug in a jar too long, what happens? The bug dies. He didn't understand why, and nor did anyone else at the time. When you think about it, air is invisible. It's just there, taken for granted, and therefore, the thought was, not to be studied. Until, as an adult, Joseph Priestley resumed his childhood experiments. He would time how long it took certain things to die if they were trapped in a jar. He learned that nothing survived in a closed environment for very long. Then he tried to burn candles in closed jars and found that they would extinguish themselves in just a few moments, seeming to burn up whatever it was that kept them going. Then one day, he had a different idea. He popped a sprig of a mint plant into the jar and waited to see how long it would take the mint sprig to die. He thought it would take days or maybe even weeks for the plant to die because his thinking was it wouldn't need very much air. A month later, the plant shriveled a little bit but was not dead. In fact, it was still growing upward. This was very puzzling for Joseph Priestley. How had the plant survived? He turned again to his experiments, and he placed candles in jars with some with plants and some without. And he found that candles with plants in the jar burned much longer than the plants without. Then he tried it with the mouse. The mouse with the plant lasted a very long time compared with the mouse without a plant. And through this experiment, Joseph Priestley discovered both oxygen and nitrogen. One of his quotes is, "To different minds, the same world is a hell and a heaven." What he was doing was actively combining his theological beliefs with scientific inquiry, making scientific discoveries that we still recognize and benefit from today. For Priestley, science and religion were not at odds, but complementary, because both demand close attention and reflection on observations. In these stories of James Freeman and Joseph Priestley, we see streams of thought and practices that are present in the Unitarian Universalism of today. Maybe you recognize them too. The congregational authority to call and ordain their own ministers, non-creedalism, and the embrace of science as a source of religious truth. These aren't the only streams of faith, that we rely on, but they are enduring streams. These stories contain streams of faith that endure, streams of faith that can hold and sustain us today. From the story of James Freeman and King's Chapel, faith in a community to be open to different beliefs, that we need not believe alike to love alike. From the story of Joseph Priestley, faith in the power of different perspectives to lead to new insights and new understandings. The understanding that things seen from a different perspective are understood differently. When we gather with people who don't look like us or think like us or believe like us, when we gather with people of all ages, all races, ethnicities, and nationalities, all class backgrounds, all sexual and gender orientations, all sizes and abilities, when we embrace the diversity of human experience, our perspective broadens and our understanding of life deepens. We need each other to see all that must be seen, and no one of us alone can see. My friends, living at a time as we do, when the diverse ways of being human on this planet seem to be either colliding or polarizing, our Unitarian Universalist faith holds out another possibility, that diversity need not mean divisiveness. It can instead be celebrated and embraced, that pluralism can enrich our lives. Ours is a faith that springs from many sources, streams of faith that have carried us to this day and will carry us into the future. While the winds of change blow on, what endures is this: our differences make us stronger. Like separate fires that kindle one flame, like tranquil streams that meet and merge and flow as one to meet the sea. Like the chorus of life resounding as one, we are better together. May it be so, and may we make it so through our living. Amen.